everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made this granny square sweater vest using yarn that I already had in my stash, which was already a resolution for me this year, is to make more projects with things that I already have. If you recognize the yarn that I used, this was actually colors that I used in my previous video on making the Aran sweater. But today in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a basic granny square. I'll show you how to place the granny squares to make a sweater pattern, and then I'll also show you how I stitch them together, as well as doing the ribbing for the collar, the sleeves, and the bottom of the sweater. As always, I'll have everything that I used linked down below. Without further ado, let's get into the video. For supplies, you will need a crochet hook. Use a hook that goes along with your weight in yarn. For my project, I used a H8 hook and something to cut with. For each granny square, I used a different combination of colors of yarn, and I needed about 38 granny squares for my vest, but that might vary depending on what measurements you have. In total, I was able to make 5 different combinations. I used anywhere from 3 to 4 colors for each granny square, and I'll show you how to change colors in this tutorial. Each of my squares measured roughly about 4 inches by 4 inches. I'm going to start this granny square with gray as the base, and the first step is to create a slip knot. This is the method I like to use, but of course you can use whatever method you like. And once we have our slip knot secure, we're going to chain 3. Next, I'm going to slip stitch back in the first chain that I created. That way we can form a sort of circle, and this will be the foundation of the granny square. So just go ahead and slip stitch, and now I'm going to chain 4. It's 1, 2, 3, and 4. This will begin round 1, and what this represents is a side and a corner, and we'll begin every round with this chain 4. But the next step is to create a set of 3 double crochets, and this will be our first side. When we make our sets of 3 double crochets, each time you make a double crochet, you want to make sure you go back into the same spot where you put the first stitch. So in this case, since we're on round 1, we'll go to the center of our chain that we made, or some people call it magic loop. So you'll make the 3 double crochets into the center. So there's 1. Now I'm going to make my second double crochet into the same center. And then again, another double crochet into the center to create a group of 3. And this will complete our side 1. So now we have a double crochet, 2 chains for a corner, and our side. Now we need to make our next corner, and we will do that by chaining 2. So that's 1, 2. And we'll move on to the second side, which will be another group of 3 double crochets into the center. 1, 2, and 3. So we have our second side. Now you can kind of see we have half of a square, so we have one side, a corner, and another side. Now we're going to make another corner and chain 2. 1, 2, and another side. So we'll make 3 double crochets into the center of our granny square. Okay, Now we're moving on to our final side, so I'm going to make a corner the same way, chain 2, but instead of making a group of 3, I only need to make 2 double crochets because from the beginning of our round, we already made 1 with our 4 chains. So I will double crochet twice into the center of our square. And then to complete our set, I will slip stitch into the second chain, and this will finish our round 1. And if you accidentally do 3 double crochets on this side, your square will be lopsided, so it's super important to remember at the end of round, we only need the 2. Now I'll show you how I change my colors. So I grab my little scissors and I snip it just a couple centimeters, and then I loop the yarn through and pull it tight. Now we can switch colors. I'm going to use light pink for my next color, and I'm going to start by making a slip knot. Once you've created your slip knot, you're going to attach it to your work. I like to pick the corner across from where I ended with my color. This just helps the granny square appear more neat and even. If you start on the same corner each time, you'll notice that your granny square will be a little lopsided in the end. Through the corner of our light gray round, I'm going to attach my light pink yarn, and I'm just being careful not to pull the knot all the way through. You'll want to keep it to the back of the granny square just for a cleaner look when we weave in the ends, and that way that the knot doesn't show through the front. Now we're going to chain 4 just like we did for the start of the first round, and this will represent our double crochet and a corner. Then we're going to make 3 double crochets into the gap of the corner from the first round. Now we have a corner and a set of 3 double crochets. Each round you'll increase how many sets of double crochets you will need for one side. For round 2, each side will have 2 sets of 3 double crochets. So we made our first set, then I'm going to chain 1 and make another set in the next corner space. Now we have a corner, our first side, and now we'll chain 2 for a corner. Now we will complete the next side by making 3 double crochets, chain 1, and then a second set of 3 double crochets. When I get to an end from a previous color, I just crochet it in with my double crochets. This step isn't necessary, but it does help with weaving in the ends. And once I complete this side, I chain 2 and move on to the next side. I start with 3 double crochets, I chain 1 and 3 double crochets, and then I chain 2 for my next corner. Once we are on the final side of round 2, make a set of 3 double crochets in the first corner, then we will chain 1, and our last set we only make 2 double crochets because again at the beginning of round we already made a double crochet. So I'll make my 2 double crochets in the same corner, then I'll slip stitch into the second chain up just as we did to finish off our first round. And that completes round 2, and I'll just go ahead and switch colors in the same way I did for the first round. Now I am going to work round 3 in the same way. The only difference is each side of the square will have 3 sets of 3 double crochets. Finish up round 3 with 2 double crochets in the last corner and slip stitch into the second chain we made at the beginning of round. Now we move on to our fourth and final round. I'm switching back to my light gray color and connecting my slip knot the same way I did as the previous rounds. This round will be the same steps except each side will have 4 sets of 3 double crochets. Now finish up the final round by making 2 double crochets in the last corner and slip stitch into the second chain from the start of round. Once you cut your yarn and pull snugly, your granny square is complete. To finish off this granny square, you will now weave in your ends. I recommend weaving in the ends right after you complete the square. That way, once all the squares are made, you can start attaching them and you won't feel like you have a million ends to weave in. Now for placement, I laid out my granny squares in the following way. The front and back panels were exactly the same. I placed 4 granny squares by 4 granny squares, and I connected the 2 panels at the shoulders with 1 square. And then for my sides, I connected the side seams with just 2 granny squares. This, I would say, is probably a medium-sized vest, but of course you can make more or less granny squares depending on your measurements. To connect the granny squares, I used the single crochet seam method. For this method, you will need yarn and your crochet hook. I started with 2 granny squares and I lined them up with wrong sides together. Find your corners and pinpoint the 2 chains for that corner. This is where you will start the seam. It's important to line up your stitches accurately. This will give you the most flawless finish. Start your seam by placing your hook through 1 corner chain of granny square A, and then place your hook through 1 corner chain of square B. Now loop your yarn around your hook and pull through both chains of both squares. Now slip the crochet hook into the next stitch on granny square A and then through square B. Now I'll yarn over and I'll pull that yarn through all 3 loops on the hook to make a single crochet. Repeat this step until you've reached the opposite corner and the whole side is seamed together. To finish your seam, cut the yarn and pull it through. I seamed together all my squares into vertical strips, and then I seamed down the strips to attach all the squares into the vest pattern. Before I moved on to crocheting the ribbing, I tried on the seamed vest and I liked the fit, so it was time to move on to the next step. Before I could start making the ribbing, I needed to single crochet around the armhole, and I cinched my armhole smaller, that way there wasn't too big of a gap. How I did this was I attached my working yarn and then I single crocheted in 3 stitches and then I skipped 1. So I would single crochet into those clusters of 3 double crochets on the granny square, and then I would skip 1 stitch. So I'm making my first single crochet, my second one, and then my third, and then whatever stitch came next I would just skip over that and then continue on by single crocheting 3 and then skipping 1. Then once I got back to the beginning of round, I slip stitched into my first single crochet. Now I'm going to create ribbing around the armhole. To create this ribbing, start by chaining 4. Now we'll turn our work. We're going to create single crochets, but we'll skip that 4th chain and go into the 3rd. Then I'm going to make single crochets through the back loop only. This will help create a ribbed effect. Only single crochet into the back loop of the 3 chains. Then I'm going to make a slip stitch into the single crochets we made around the armhole. However, I'm not going to go into each one. I'm going to skip 1 and then make my slip stitch. Then I'll turn my work and I'll go back up using the same method of single crochet through the back loop. 1, 2, and 3. Then at the top we'll chain 1 and turn it around. Now we'll skip the first chain and single crochet into the back loop for the next 3 stitches. Then we'll slip stitch into the armhole stitch, remembering to skip one for a decrease. Then we'll turn our work. You'll repeat this rib stitch decrease all the way around the armhole. For the neckline, you will complete the ribbing in the same way as the armholes, except the ribbing will be 5 stitches long instead of 3. This will make the ribbing around the neckline longer. For the bottom of the vest, I did the same method of ribbing, except this time I made it 7 stitches long. And as I go around with my single crochets, I just catch all of these little stray ends. That way I don't have to weave them in at the end.
That is it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe if you are enjoying the content that I make, as well as hitting the bell for notifications for whenever I post next. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, day, night, whatever time it is for you, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!